The night was thick with fear and silence as Jacob stood alone beside the River Jabbok. Behind him lay his family, asleep and unaware of the storm battling inside him. Before him loomed the danger of his estranged brother Esau, a man he had deceived long ago, now approaching with 400 armed men. Jacob's past, once pushed far away, had returned with a vengeance. Despite all he had gained, wives, children, and wealth, he now faced a crisis that strategy could not solve. Fear churned within him, and the weight of destiny pressed heavily on his shoulders. This would not merely be a night of anxiety. It would be a night of divine confrontation. In the silence of the wilderness, God would come to Jacob, not as a gentle whisper, not as a vision in the night, but as a wrestling opponent who would challenge him to the very depths of his soul. This mysterious encounter would break him and bless him, wounding his body but transforming his identity forever. Who was the stranger Jacob wrestled? Was he an angel, a manifestation of God himself, or was he a being beyond human understanding? Before we continue, if you enjoy biblical stories brought to life with depth and cinematic narration, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this story with others who love discovering hidden truths in Scripture. Your support helps this ministry reach more people and keeps these teachings alive. Now let us step into that dark night at the Jabbok, where heaven touched earth and a man wrestled with God. Jacob's entire existence had been marked by conflict and pursuit. Even before his first breath, he grappled for position inside his mother's womb, wrestling against Esau as though destiny itself were a battlefield. When the twins were born, Jacob emerged grasping Esau's heel, a symbolic act that foreshadowed the patterns his life would follow. His very name, Jacob, carried the meaning of heel grabber or supplanter, hinting at a character shaped by rivalry and relentless determination. The family into which Jacob was born only intensified this internal struggle. Isaac, the aging patriarch, admired Esau's rugged strength and hunting skill. Esau, with his wild nature and fearless pursuit of the outdoors, embodied everything Isaac valued. Meanwhile, Rebekah saw something different in Jacob: intelligence, foresight, a heart attuned to promises yet unseen. Her favoritism nurtured Jacob's belief that he deserved the blessing of the firstborn, even if he had to obtain it through cunning means. But the path Jacob chose came at a steep cost. He exploited Esau's hunger to secure the birthright. Later, guided by his mother's plan, he disguised himself as his brother to deceive Isaac into granting him the sacred paternal blessing. Though Jacob achieved what he longed for, the moment carried a bitter aftertaste. The blessings he gained through manipulation were overshadowed by the broken trust and the fear of his brother's vengeance. His triumph did not bring peace, it drove him into exile. Fleeing to the eastern land of Haran, Jacob entered a new chapter of difficult lessons. There he encountered his uncle Laban, a man who mastered deception with ease. Jacob, the trickster, found himself repeatedly outmaneuvered. The wife he loved, Rachel, was withheld from him in favor of Leah. Years of labor stretched into decades as Jacob struggled not only to build a household, but to keep his integrity intact. The deceiver was being humbled, shaped, and confronted by a God who refused to leave him as he was. Despite the hardships, Jacob prospered. His family grew, his flocks multiplied, and his influence expanded. But wealth could not soothe the unresolved wounds of his heart. The fear of Esau remained a shadow over every step. His faith was still intertwined with anxiety, his heart still wrestling with guilt and identity. Then God called Jacob to return to the land of his fathers, a command both thrilling and terrifying. Obedience to God meant facing the past he had spent his life running from. When word reached him that Esau approached with 400 men, panic surged through him like a tidal wave. Every strategy he employed, dividing his camp, preparing gifts to appease Esau, organizing escape routes, reflected a heart still torn between trust in God and reliance on self-preservation. Finally, when all his strength, plans, and cleverness failed to provide assurance, Jacob fell to his knees in earnest prayer. Perhaps for the first time his words revealed a true humility before the God of Abraham and Isaac. He confessed his unworthiness of the blessings he had received. He acknowledged that God, not deception, had made him who he was. And he pleaded for deliverance, not only from Esau's wrath, but from the consequences of his own past. This prayer marked a turning point. Jacob's battle was no longer merely against his brother or his circumstances, it was against the deeper struggle within himself. God was preparing Jacob for a confrontation far more profound than he expected, one that would not take place with swords or schemes, but in the stillness of the night, at a lonely ford of the Jabbok River. It would be there that God would meet Jacob in physical form, not to destroy him, but to transform him into the man he was called to be. Silence settled over the camp like a heavy cloak. Children breathed softly as they slept, unaware of the danger that approached with every passing hour. The animals rested, their bodies still after the long day's journey. But Jacob could not rest. His mind raced with worry. The cold of the desert night clung to his skin, yet fear burned warmer than any fire. He had sent his family and possessions across the River Jabbok, placing everything he loved on the far side of the water, as though physical distance might protect them from the wrath of Esau. Now he was alone, with only the sounds of wind and shifting sand to accompany his troubled thoughts. Every rustle in the bushes made him turn. Every shadow felt like a threat. Tomorrow he would face the brother he wronged, a man who might be coming to take revenge. Jacob's heart trembled at the thought. He had run from this moment for decades, and now there was nowhere left to flee. As Jacob stood in that deep darkness, something happened that changed the course of his life. A figure emerged from the shadows, silent, swift, and utterly unannounced. There were no words of challenge, no warning cry, no chance to prepare. The stranger lunged at Jacob, and in an instant they were locked in fierce combat. The ground beneath them became a battleground. Dust rose around them as their bodies collided with desperate intensity. This was not a clash of swords or armies, it was as raw and personal as struggle can be. Jacob grappled with a strength that seemed beyond human. The mysterious man's movements were precise, powerful, and unyielding. Every attempt Jacob made to overpower him was met with equal force. Sweat poured down Jacob's face as exhaustion crept into his muscles, but something compelled him to continue. He would not, surrender. Jacob had spent a lifetime fighting for love, fighting for blessing, fighting for survival. But this conflict felt different. There was an unseen weight behind it, a sacred purpose that Jacob could not yet understand. With every moment that passed, he realized this was more than a physical attack. It was a confrontation of identity, a divine intervention meant to tear away the layers of fear and deceit that had controlled him for so long. The night stretched on, minute after minute passing like hours. Neither opponent seemed willing to yield. The stranger never spoke, yet his silence communicated more than words. It was as though God himself had stepped into Jacob's path, refusing to allow him forward until the deepest struggle within was brought to the surface. Jacob, breathless and battered, understood at a level beyond logic that this was a holy encounter. For the first time in his life, he was not fighting to steal or preserve a blessing. He was fighting to receive one honestly. His hands clutched this mysterious being not in deception but in desperate reliance. He was clinging to something, or rather someone, greater than all the ambitions that had driven him. This was the battle Jacob had been avoiding his entire life. The battle not against his brother, not against circumstances, but against his own heart. And God had chosen to meet him here, in the dust of the earth, to wrestle the pride out of him and awaken in him the grace he had always needed. The horizon began to pale with the first traces of dawn, signaling the end of the long night. Jacob was bruised, breathless, and exhausted. Every movement felt weighed down by the burden of his past and the fear of what lay ahead. Yet something within him would not release its grip. He refused to let go, not of this opponent, and not of the blessing he knew this encounter represented. Sensing Jacob's unbreakable resolve, the mysterious being shifted the nature of the struggle. What came next was not a move of brute strength, but a deliberate divine act. With a mere touch, not a strike or a blow, the stranger placed his hand upon Jacob's hip. That simple contact unleashed a surge of pain so sharp and sudden that Jacob's leg collapsed beneath him. His hip was displaced instantly, proving with undeniable clarity that this was no ordinary man. A power far beyond human strength was now fully revealed. Jacob cried out in agony. His body weakened beyond what he had ever experienced. Yet even in crippling pain, he clung to the mysterious figure with unwavering determination. His arms tightened, not as a warrior seeking victory, but as a desperate soul refusing to lose the one he now recognized as his true source of blessing. For the first time during the entire encounter, the stranger spoke. His voice carried authority and mystery as he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." There was urgency in the command, a holy tension that suggested something beyond human comprehension, as though the identity of this divine visitor was not fully meant to be seen by the light of day. Jacob could have released him. He could have allowed the pain to overpower his will, but instead, with a courage that rose from deep conviction, he uttered words that would echo throughout the generations. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." In that single sentence, Jacob's heart was laid bare. He no longer sought God's favor through manipulation or deceit. He no longer relied on clever schemes or human strength. He clung to God out of pure faith, surrender, and hunger for transformation. In the wound, God exposed Jacob's weakness. In the cling, Jacob demonstrated his faith, and through both, God revealed his divine purpose. Jacob now understood that he was wrestling not with an enemy, but with a divine messenger, perhaps even with God in human form. This wound in his hip became a sacred mark of the encounter, a living testimony that blessing does not come through force, but through submission to the one who gives it. Jacob had reached the end of himself, and that is precisely where God began his work. His limp would remain for the rest of his life, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a permanent reminder that true strength is found when we are brought low before God. What Jacob could not achieve through a lifetime of striving, God accomplished in a single touch. As the struggle reached its turning point, the mysterious being did something unexpected. Instead of overpowering Jacob, he posed a question that cut deeper than any physical blow. "What is your name?" This question forced Jacob to confront the truth of his own identity. By answering Jacob, he was admitting the person he had always been, a man whose very name carried the weight of his failures, the deceiver, the one who grasps and takes, the man defined by competition and fear. The stranger's response changed everything. He declared, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." This was more than a renaming, it was a rebirth. The identity Jacob had carried from birth, shaped by rivalry and deceit, was being replaced. God was giving him a new destiny, one rooted not in manipulation but in faith. Israel, one who wrestles with God, marked him as a man who had not simply survived conflict but had clung to God through it. God was shaping the future of an entire nation in that moment. From this transformed man would come the tribes of Israel. A covenant people would trace their heritage back not to Jacob's schemes, but to Israel's encounter with the divine in the night. Jacob's past no longer held authority over his future. Still aching with pain, Jacob longed to know more about the one who had changed his life so completely. "Tell me your name," he asked, a request for clarity, for revelation, for certainty regarding the identity of the being who stood before him. But the reply came in the form of holy restraint. "Why do you ask my name?" It was not a refusal, but a reminder that God does not reveal himself on human terms. His mysteries often remain just beyond full understanding, inviting faith instead of control. Then the stranger blessed Jacob, a blessing unlike the one taken from Esau years earlier. This blessing was not obtained through deception or cleverness. It was freely granted by God's grace, received in weakness instead of stolen through strength. It was the blessing Jacob had searched for his whole life without knowing where to find it, and now was given directly from the one who held it all along. As the first rays of sunlight rose, the night's combat came to an end. Jacob stood in awe and trembling revelation. He named the place Peniel, the face of God, because he believed he had encountered God himself and lived. The limp in his walk testified to the truth of what happened. Every step he took from that day forward declared the power of that encounter. God had touched him, wounded him, and transformed him. Jacob walked away changed, not only in name and not only in body, but in destiny. Israel would forever carry the memory of a man who met God in the darkness and rose to walk into the light, marked by God and guided by his promise. The sun continued to rise as Jacob limped forward, each step reminding him of the divine encounter that had taken place only moments before. His body was weakened, but something far stronger now filled his heart. The fear that once gripped him was tempered by the assurance that God had not only confronted him, he had blessed him. Jacob walked toward his greatest earthly fear with heaven's mark upon him. In the distance, Esau appeared with his company of 400 men, a sight that would have once paralyzed Jacob with panic. But now, Jacob bowed low to the ground, not in manipulation as he had done in years past, but with genuine humility. He was no longer the deceiver who hid behind schemes. Israel now stood before his brother, a man God had transformed from the inside out. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Instead of charging with vengeance, Esau broke into a run. Tears filled his eyes as he embraced Jacob tightly, their bodies shaking with emotion. The anger that had burned for decades was gone, replaced by a love that neither brother could have anticipated. The one who had sworn to kill Jacob now kissed him. The one who had fled in fear now wept in relief. This reunion was not the result of human negotiation or strategic gifts. The transformation Esau displayed was itself evidence that God had already been at work, softening his heart long before Jacob arrived. The God who wrestled Jacob into surrender had also prepared Esau to offer forgiveness. This moment of reconciliation revealed the deeper purpose of the night's spiritual battle. The victory Jacob received was not primarily the blessing of prosperity or protection. It was the restoration of his relationships and the healing of his past. God had dealt with the internal conflict before he addressed the external one. Jacob's transformation into Israel meant that he could now face Esau not as a rival, but as a brother. With peace restored and the burden of guilt finally lifted, Jacob understood the true outcome of his divine wrestling. He did not simply escape danger. He stepped into a future shaped by God rather than fear. Israel walked forward with a new identity, a renewed family bond, and the assurance that the God who met him in the struggle would lead him in the days ahead. The question at the heart of Jacob's encounter is the one readers have asked for centuries. Who was this being who wrestled Jacob in the night? The narrative of Genesis calls him simply a man. Yet Jacob himself left the scene declaring, "I have seen God face to face." This tension between humanity and divinity lies at the center of the mystery. Later, Scripture adds further insight. Hosea chapter 12 verse 4 identifies the figure as an angel, yet one who spoke with divine authority and delivered a blessing only God himself could bestow. This suggests that the wrestler was not merely a heavenly servant, but a divine messenger who carried God's own presence and power. Many Christian theologians see in this encounter what is known as a Christophany, an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. This would mean that the one who humbled himself to struggle with Jacob was the same one who would later humble himself to walk among humanity in the flesh. In both moments, God drew near not to destroy, but to redeem. The nature of the wrestling itself points toward this interpretation. God could have overpowered Jacob instantly, yet he chose to contend with him through the long hours of darkness. The struggle was not God testing his strength against Jacob, but God wresting Jacob away from his old identity. The moment the divine being touched Jacob's hip and disabled his physical power, the deeper purpose of the encounter was fully revealed. Jacob's reliance on self had to be broken, so that God could build in him a new identity grounded in faith. The blessing Jacob received, and the new name Israel, came only after he admitted who he was and clung to the one he now recognized as his only source of hope. Divine resistance became divine restoration. God confronted Jacob's grasping nature and transformed it into dependence on grace. Jacob limped away from the encounter, and Scripture says that limp remained with him for the rest of his life. It was a visible reminder that encountering God changes us, not just emotionally or spiritually, but in ways that affect every step we take going forward. The limp declared that he had wrestled with the Almighty and lived, not victorious in strength, but victorious in surrender. The identity of the wrestler, therefore, is not meant to be fully untangled by the human mind. He is presented mysteriously, as man, as angel, as God, because he is the very boundary where heaven touches earth. The one who fought Jacob into blessing was the one who later fought death into defeat. Whether we call him angel, messenger, or God in human form, his purpose was unmistakable: to confront Jacob, transform Jacob, and lead Jacob into the destiny God had always intended. Jacob's night of wrestling was not just a story from ancient history. It is a living image of the journey every believer must face. Like Jacob, we carry fears that haunt us, regrets that follow us, and identities shaped by past failures. We wrestle with uncertainty, questioning God's timing when prayers seem unanswered. We struggle to trust His plan when life feels unjust or confusing. We wrestle not only with external pressures, but with the internal battles of the heart: pride, doubt, insecurity, and the longing for approval. Jacob's encounter reveals that God often meets us in these wrestling moments. He does not always speak softly from a distance. Sometimes He confronts us directly, challenging the parts of us that resist His will. The breaking of Jacob's hip shows that God may allow pain, not as punishment, but as a way of removing the false strength we rely on. Through holy struggle, He dismantles the self-made identity we cling to, so He can rebuild us according to His purpose. The limp Jacob carried from Peniel was not a symbol of defeat. It was proof that he had met God and refused to release Him. In the same way, our weaknesses and scars can become testimonies that God has worked in us. They remind us that faith is not about overpowering God or controlling our destiny, but about holding on to Him through every trial. It is in the moments when we are weakest, when our strength fails and our pride breaks, that God's grace is most clearly seen. The God who wrestled Jacob by the river still meets His people where their desperation is greatest: when fear tries to suffocate your hope, when the past rises to accuse you, when you cannot see how tomorrow will unfold. Cling to God with everything you have. True victory is not found in overpowering Him, but in surrendering to His transforming presence. Jacob entered the night as a man defined by struggle, but he emerged at sunrise with a new name, a new destiny, and a new walk. The same God stands ready to do this in the lives of His people today, turning wrestlers into worshipers, fugitives into fathers of promise, and wounded souls into vessels of divine blessing. Jacob's story reminds us that God can transform anyone. The trickster became the patriarch. The fugitive became Israel. The one who wrestled with God became the father of a nation chosen to carry the promise of redemption. You may feel broken. You may feel unworthy. You may be wrestling with your own fears right now. But if you hold on to God, if you refuse to let go, He can turn your struggle into a blessing that shapes not only your future, but the future of others. If this story has blessed or inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more powerful biblical stories, and comment below with your reflections. Share this message with someone who needs to be reminded that God still meets His people in the night and transforms those who cling to Him. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest blessings come from the moments we fight the hardest, when we wrestle with God and rise transformed.